Good morning. I guess one of the prerogatives you have when you have your own interview show, sometimes you can take a little license and ask anybody on who you darn well want to ask on. And the pretense of the guest that I have today is the fact that he's just a very interesting fella. He's been around for a long time in the Knoxville area, in the media in particular, and we're going to pick his brain a little bit. His name is Jim Early. He's been a former news director to several TV stations here in town, has a good overall view of a lot of things, including the economy and the state of the media locally. We'll start picking Jim's brain in just a moment. And welcome back. Again, my guest this morning is Jim Early. Jim has quite a resume that goes way back here in the local media in Knoxville. In fact, even at this station, when this station used to be Channel 26, Jim was the very first cameraman at the station. I just found that out about 1 minute ago. And a fellow who is going to be retiring this year, Bill Eckstein, who is at the station. It was the first director. And Jim's, again, his resume goes way back. He's a graduate of the University of Tennessee in the School of Journalism. He was also served a time in the Air Force, and has been around for a long time, again, mainly in the media. Was former news director at Channel 6, former news director at Channel 10, was with Clayton Industries for a while, and now he has his own advertising agency, Jim Early Associates. Jim, it's good to have you here.
Thank you. Yes, I'm 20 years deep into my second career now in advertising.
That's right. Okay, we're gonna cover a lot of ground here, Jim. Let's just, first of all, talk about the economy a little bit. You can't pick up a newspaper without, seeing some big plant or another laying off people here, laying off people there, and people losing their jobs and whatnot. I would think you'd have a pretty good handle on maybe the local economy, and that you deal with businesses and their advertising budgets and what they're allowing. How are things going out there, just from your perspective?
Don, I would like to preface my remarks by saying I am not speaking this morning for the Knoxville advertising community. I can really only speak for Jim Early and Associates and my own company. But there is a certain amount of validity into some of the things that I have, some of the conversations I've had with other agency people. Yes, there is a recession in my mind, but I think a lot of it is imagined. It doesn't seem to matter whether the recession is real or whether it is imagined. It works the same way. If you tell someone that we're in a recession, then he thinks he has to cut back on his spending, and that is, of course, what causes a recession. In the case of an advertiser, his friends say, you've got to cut back because we're in a recession. Well, in too many cases, he thinks, well, I can't cut back on my rent, can't cut back on my employees, can't cut back on this. I'll cut back on my advertising. And then, as you can imagine, when this happens, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We have had this happen in the agency, clients who, well, let me give you a quick example of this. It's a story that I heard years ago and I love. There was an old man who stood on a corner and he sold apples. And he held up his apples and he said, "Apples, 5 cents." And business was good. So he got the idea that he would make him a little handwritten sign, and it said, "Apples, 5 cents." And between the sign and his saying "Apples, 5 cents," business was fantastic. And a friend came up and says, "What are you doing, old man? Don't you know there's a recession on?" He says, "No, I didn't know that." So he took down his sign and he quit calling apples 5 cents, and sure enough, they were right. There was a recession on. And I think this is a lot that's happened in the media, because the people who did cut back on their advertising, not immediately. It takes about 2 months to really see the effects of a complete cutback or cut off of advertising. But after a couple of months, they realized that, in fact, that there was a problem and something had to be done. On the other hand, we have clients who kept a steady line of advertising, were completely consistent, kept their advertising budgets up to pre-quote recession unquote levels, and they don't know that there's a recession going on.
Now, I can remember in college, advertising courses that I took, one of the things that stuck in my mind at that time, I forgot what the exact little saying was, but it was to the effect that when business is going good, it's a good idea to advertise, to keep on top of things. When business is going bad, it's almost a necessity to advertise to stay competitive.
Very much so, and the people who do keep up their advertising levels or even increase them have done well this year. We handle about 18 companies in the Knoxville area, and those that have kept up their advertising levels, and I'm repeating myself, have done well this year. And but I know we came out of a record year at the agency, Early & Associates, and we were looking forward to another record year. And January, we were like the Maytag repairman. I mean, our business just got quiet. We had the war going on. People were glued to their television sets, their newspapers for the news of the war. At the same time, everybody was screaming recession, and business died. Frankly, I was concerned for the first time in the 20 years that I've had the agency. But then, after the war ended, and I don't know what happened, January 31st, things turned around. We have enjoyed a very good year in the agency.
Do you think Knoxville is, since we're not in the Rust Belt and some of these big industrial areas, or Detroit where they're laying off, thousands of people in one shot, the fact that we do have a certain diversity of industry here probably helps the fact that we're not feeling that crunch, the real crunch like some other areas are?
I don't think that Knoxville, again, I'm not the expert on the economy, I don't think we have felt it like other parts of the country, and certainly the diversity of our industry has got a lot to do with that.
Right. Okay, what do you see for the future, Jim? Do you see things looking brighter? Do you think people are going to come back and start spending again?
Oh, I think so. I think it's just a matter of time. Again, I don't profess to be able to look into a crystal ball and give you any particular dates or years or months or whatever, but I think it will definitely start on an upturn in the not too distant future.
That really is amazing when you think about it, the impact of just even a suggestion that there is that there is a recession, that even if you don't feel it immediately, locally, or you don't see it, or the guy across the street may not necessarily have been fired from his job or whatnot, but there is, I know even in myself, there is a certain amount of caution when I hear these things. Maybe I won't get that new car this year. Maybe I'll hold off on getting that, adding that other room to my house. And you compound that. I imagine it's quite a psychological
To preach
hit.
against the talking about recession, it happened to me. In January of last year, like as I say, when things were kind of quiet, we had discussed adding on to our facility, and that had to put a stop till we saw what was going to happen. What's the old joke, I guess, about a recession is when you lose your job, and a depression is when your wife loses hers.
That's right.
I think there's a little more to it than that, but that was the concept.
That's good. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the media here. I couldn't think of a better person to ask a question about the media, considering how long you've been in it. Right off the bat, what do you think of Knoxville being a one newspaper town these days?
It concerns me, in all honesty. I was really caught short with this announcement. I had no idea that this was going to happen. And we have dealt with both the Journal and the Sentinel for many, many years, and have a lot of good friends in both newspapers. I'm going to speak personally that I enjoyed both newspapers. And I think the readers are going to lose a great deal in losing the Journal. I think it's a great newspaper.
I'll tell you, Jim, we're going to talk more about the Journal. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
Sure.
We're going to a break, and my director's yelling in my ear. So we'll go to that now and be back and talk more about the local media. And welcome back. Again, my guest this morning is Jim Early. He's head of Jim Early Associates, and along with being a friend of mine, is also an avid motorcyclist like myself, and a real Renaissance man we have here today. Jim, you were talking about the one newspaper town concept. We had to go to commercial. Follow up on that, on your thoughts there.
I think I pretty well said what I wanted to say, but the fact is that competition is good, and any time that you have no competition, witness the old telephone days when there was no competition. then I think that the public is the loser in this situation. Now, this is not to say that the News Sentinel will not continue to do a very good job and the advertisers will get a fair shake, but I can't help believe that it's still better when you have a two-newspaper town.
All right. You were telling me, too, during the break that even with the recession and people holding off buying cars or maybe adding on to their houses, but the entertainment business has been doing quite well.
You know, this is surprising to me because first of all, our agency is heavily based in entertainment. We're the promoter for Ringling Brothers Circus and Walt Disney World on Ice in the southeastern area, as well as we're the agency for Ober-Gatlinburg Ski Resort, and we do some work for Dollywood and so on. And it seems that even when money is tough, people still find a dollar for entertainment. I guess this goes back. Now, I wasn't an adult in the Great Depression. In fact, I was just born about that time, even though you made me sound like an awfully old man.
Didn't mean to.
No. And, but even in the 30s, when times were really tough, and it was hard to get a nickel for a loaf of bread, families would still come up with a dime to go to the moving pictures.
That's right.
And I guess this is some way of escapism to get away from their misery with everything else in the Depression. And we're finding this a lot right now. We did the Walt Disney World on Ice back in October as an example, and we had one of the best years we've ever had in Knoxville. So I think that the entertainment business will continue to do well, and people will give up something else in order to still be entertained.
Well, speaking of entertainment, you mentioned Dollywood. Country music has really, in the last couple of years, has just really come on strong.
It's just mushroomed, hasn't it?
Is there any explanation for that?
I don't know. I think the younger people are getting more into country music. You know, it used to be that the younger people were more rock-oriented, and the older folks liked the country music. That's one thought. Another thought is that it's sometimes rather difficult to distinguish between country music and rock or that type of music. There's such a crossover. But I know that people in my youngest son's, his friends that were just very anti-country music not too long ago are some of their most avid listeners now.
I can understand that because I think a lot of young people who maybe can't buy into rap or can't buy into heavy metal or some of the other options that are supposedly open to them on so-called rock stations. I could see this as being a haven for them, rock music.
It very much is, and the country music stations are the ones that are bringing in the big ratings.
Yeah, that's right.
Not just in Knoxville, but even in cities like Chicago and places like this. It's amazing.
That's right. WIVK here owns this market, lock, stock, and numbers.
Very much so.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the local media, Jim. The state of local television news. Give me your thoughts on that.
You know, I think Knoxville, and I'll base this on my travels around the country, Knoxville is blessed with some excellent television news operations. In fact, it seems to me that some of the local people in the local production of news is certainly on a par with cities like Chicago, Atlanta, and what have you. It's amazing to me that it's come such a long way. I first got into news in 1955, I think it was, and in those days we had about 2 people at Channel 6, I think. We used to cut pictures out of Life magazine and paste them on a wall to get us some video, and then of course we got into to our 16mm cameras, and we had to use a little hand processor if we were to get any video out. All of my years in television was all 16mm film, and of course we ran the full cycle from black and white with the old Houston Fearless processors, and I think we made the transition to color film in the early 60s, and it was such a drastic change. Videotape came along after I left in 1970, but in this day and time, well, let me go back. In the 50s and 60s, a news director was an editor, yes. He was a news manager, yes. But he was also a newsman. I mean, I had to sleep with a police radio under my pillow. And if something happened during the night, it was not at all uncommon for me, the news director, to get out and chase the stories all around. In today's electronic news, A news director he's more of a manager, of course. Mm-hmm. He is a satellite manager. You can do so many more things now than we could do back in those days. I mean, if something big happened, we had to go out on the scene, shoot it on film, bring it back and process it, mm-hmm. Physically cut the film, mm-hmm. and then get it on the air. Now you can go out with your live feeds and just instantly report on something. Television has just come so far mm-hmm. in such a short time, and news is...
Yeah, I know.
It's just unreal.
Even in my own personal experience, Jim, the 20 years I've been in television, used to be the news director was somebody who was a hard-boiled journalist type guy who would get out there, like you say, would sleep with a scanner under his pillow. These days, a news director almost has to be an expert on demographics, an expert on the media in general, and what people want to see and what they want to hear, and know all the little nuances of what an audience wants and what it takes to build that particular audience. More so, I think, a thrust toward that than the old hardcore journalist.
The old Ed Asner type of news director from the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Exactly.
No, I think now in this day and time he has to be more the executive, and I think you could be a news director without really knowing a lot about journalism.
I think you're right. Okay, Jim. Well, on that note, we'll be back in just a moment. We'll talk more to Jim Early, so stay with us. And again, welcome back. My guest this morning, Jim Early, head of Jim Early Associates. And as I alluded at the beginning of the show, Jim has been in local television for a very long time. In fact, it dates back to 1953. And, let's talk a little bit about where we're sitting up here on top of Sharps Ridge. Of course, it's Channel 8 now, but it used to be Channel 26.
Channel 26.
And I was asking you, what was the first station to start in Knoxville? And you said that Channel 6 beat 26 by 25 minutes
I think it was about 25 minutes. Everybody was sitting around watching their blank screens, waiting for somebody to come on, and as best I recall, Channel 6 was on the air just for about 20 minutes to say they were on the air, and then about 20 minutes later, 25 minutes later, Channel 26, which was then, the call letters were WTSK-TV in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Then they came on the air, and both of them just stayed on, made a little announcement that they were on the air, and then went right off. There was no regular programming started at that point.
Yeah.
It just simply amazes me to come up on this hill again after thinking back to 1953, and I'm sure you've heard the stories that where we have a nice big wide paved driveway coming up the hill. Back in those days, there were 2 mud ruts, and we parked our cars down at the bottom of the hill, and they brought us up in 4-wheel drive vehicles to get to work.
Wow.
The entire studio up here, we now have this real nice, big, spacious facility. You're familiar with your videotape room. Mm-hmm. Well, that was the studio. Wow. All of this was built around what is now just your little videotape room. It was 2 stories, and the studio was tiny. Yet we used to put on dance parties. Everything was live. We had no videotape back in those days. Everything had to be live. We shot the commercials live. We did dance parties. We did everything. The funny thing was we didn't have a film chain in the beginning, and didn't have a separate camera for that. And so we would have to take the studio camera and run it into a hole in the wall in order to pick up and serve as the film chain. So this business has really come a long way, and the station has come a long way.
Okay, everybody who ever did or was involved in live television has at least 1 or 2 really good live television stories to tell. Have you got one that comes to mind, Jim?
Oh, I can remember several. From my cameraman days, Hal Ernest, who is now one of the top executives for Lavidge and Associates, was an announcer at Channel 6 back in the 50s, and I was the cameraman. And we were going to do a live commercial with a lawnmower, power mower. And back in those days, we used the fake grass, and we had this spread out on the floor. Hal had the lawnmower sitting on it, and he says, "And let me just show you how easy it is to start." He gave it a yank, and it just sucked up the grass carpet into it. That's one that I recall. Television was fun back in those days. Not that it still isn't, but it's more of a serious business now. And back then, we were all new. We were learning. We had no one to say that this is how you do it. We were setting the standards. And some of the things that we did, we would get fired for today.
What about the actual content of the shows, Jim? Are the news shows now, are people being better served now than they were back, say 20 years ago?
Oh, no question about it. First of all, back then, the newscasts at most were 15 minutes long. And even then, we thought we had a tough time filling 15 minutes. When we went to the first half-hour news in the 60s, we thought this would be impossible. But it enabled us to do more than just the headlines, to get into some of the issues, to do editorials, to really get behind the headlines and the stories behind the stories. And actually, in our newscasts, as you did here for a while, I think it was a great idea, because there's so much that television can do that is not being done because of the time limitations.
Is there anything in local television news that you see happening, Jim, that you're not especially happy about?
I think that the only thing I could say on that is I think sometimes that local television news overplays the importance of certain stories, and I know you're running out of time, so I'm going to stop right here.
Well, I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have you back on someday, and we'll let you. We'll use that as a tease. We'll let you talk about that and more. Jim, thank you for being here, and you have a nice Sunday.